early on in.
Hello, this is Chris Nielson in the Breaking Up with Fear series with William Grace Frost, and I've loved some of his stories and excited to have him on the line here. And William and I, before we got on the call, we're talking about your early facilitation days.
Yeah, back in the 80s, hate to say how long ago it was, but the late 80s and 90s, when I was first really getting my feet wet in being a professional facilitator. I was working almost from the beginning with Fortune 500 marketing teams. I joined a company that had them as clients, everybody from AT&T to McDonald's to Coca-Cola to P&G, you name a big company like that, and they were our clients. And they would do these 4-day long, essentially brainstorming projects, and up in front of the room, in front of 7-8 people, and had to lead them through a process that would get them to the point where they walked away with big ideas that they could take back and do research on and such. And when I started out, I was pretty green. I had written my master's thesis on nurturing creative behavior. So I'd done a lot of work in the theoretical realm, and I'd done a pre-test, post-test control group at a university for a semester. And so I had a little bit of practical experience, and I had attended the Creative Problem Solving Institute in Buffalo, New York for a number of years and done their leadership program. So I wasn't completely green, but to stand in front of these marketing teams with no marketing background myself, I was shaking in my boots.
What were the things you were saying to yourself inside, or how were you feeling beside that shaking? What was the story?
Those thoughts were like, I don't belong here. I'm a phony. I don't know enough. I don't know their world. I've never stood in their shoes. I've never tried to, launch a national cereal brand, for General Mills or Kellogg's or something. And it showed too, because we would typically have a meal together before the process starts. And so it was very social, and they often would ask me, well, tell us your background, and it's like I'd have to, try to puff myself up and tell them, how, where I'd come from and my background and how interesting it all was. And there was a point at which maybe it might have been a year to a year and a half, maybe even 2 years into it, where I had become so conversant in it, number one, and number two, emotionally, energetically, I just held myself as being confident.
How did you get from?
And they stopped asking me those questions. They
really?
Simply, after the second year, I don't think anybody ever asked me my background again.
So it might have been, like your vibration or whatever energy that you were giving off.
Absolutely.
That they wanted to know, but when you were confident in yourself, they stopped asking those same questions. So I want to know, here's my curiosity now, how you went from that person that was feeling a little bit like the imposter syndrome, who might have delivered this, to very confident in. What was the transition? What were the moments that got you to that other place?
Well, certainly repetition.
Yeah.
And the process that we used was more or less the same process in a similar context with different clients. So I was able to do the same thing over and over and over and over again, to the point where I didn't need any notes. I didn't need to practice beforehand. I could stand in front of a group, and I had a fabulous mentor. The man who started it, Fred Myers, was a man in his late 60s and then 70s, and then he retired at one point. I can't remember how old he was, but anyway, he was a fabulous mentor. He basically said, "Be a sponge. I'll carry the ball. You follow me. Do what I do. Mimic me. But don't try to innovate on the process. until you're fully grounded in how we do it.
Yeah.
Once you are really confident and grounded in it, then when you start to make shifts or changes or be creative in how you do things and bring your own unique style and flavor into it and really be yourself, that's when you'll really shine. And at that point, I actually started to attract clients myself without hardly even having to try, because I was embodying it. But so repetition, great mentor. Um, and I am one to use the metaphor of I often jump into the deep end of the swimming pool without knowing how to swim. And there's something
And what does
about,
that mean to you when you say that?
there's some, well, to make it till you fake it, to act as if, those are all terminologies around that. The first time I was on one of these projects with Fred, we always worked in pairs, and so I always had him but he would say, okay, time for you to take a turn up front, William. And I'd go, I take the marker, and we were working on flip charts then. Everything is electronic now, but back
Yeah.
then it was all flip charts and markers. And I got up there and led a process, and and he nodded and smiled at me, and gave me encouragement. And after every client would leave at the end of the week, we'd sit down and he'd go over with, where he saw I could improve and, what I did well. And so really good mentoring and really good feedback. And I believe everybody needs a really good mentor in their lives. It's really a great way to learn.
I love that story, and I get too. I heard that in as well. The repetitions made a difference for me too. Was when I was afraid to miss a free throw. Shooting more free throws helped drop some of that fear.
There's no replacement for it.
Repetition can make all the. And it's even just saying, I survived this moment. I
Mm-hmm.
can survive this one, and this is getting easier and easy. Wow, I can do it. And I love his advice too about knowing this particular process. Then you get permission to innovate off of that, and
Yeah.
you ground
Yeah.
in those basics. One of my favorite coaches, John Wooden, he worked on the
Mm-hmm.
basics over and over again. Then he helped people go at a high speed. But I also love what your mentor did is multiple things. Sounds like he created, because you went together, and this is what I tell a lot of people that are afraid to facilitate or speak, go with a partner.
Mm-hmm.
At least you have someone backing you up and practice with it, that you're
Yeah.
there. You can feel, oh my gosh. I remember doing this presentation and it had a video near the beginning, and I go, oh good, I get to play the video. I got a chance to take a glass of water and breathe for a second without the focus
Yeah.
being on
Yeah.
you the whole time.
Yeah. And there were times too where you might invite me into a process, and it was okay for me to say, Fred, I don't feel really good about this one. I'm unclear, where we're trying to take the group right now. So I think it'd be better if I didn't step up right now. And he'd go, okay. And then we'd talk about that later. And he was so confident in what he did. He could carry me, and stay focused on the group as well.
What an
Um,
incredible mentor. And,
you know,
I love so many things you said about him, that don't worry, I've got this, and you follow me. So set a great example, watch me and deliver what I do. And then you need me, I'm here. And then afterwards, I'm sure he went over the things you did good and the things you can improve on. So every time you were getting that feedback so quick,
yeah.
you get better that fast.
Yeah, and I think what's going on behind it too is I was so highly motivated. I wanted to understand and to learn that process really, really badly. I used to sit there with my yellow pad and write down almost verbatim every word he would say, and
I've
I'd
done that with people too.
take those and practice it. And then the next week we'd be in the same session, with a different client, and he'd be saying the same thing, and I'd be writing down the same thing again. And I had pages and pages and pages of all his words. And by the time I was up there doing it myself, I was saying his words, but I was saying it, from my heart, from my mind, from the way I moved my body. It was very different than the way he moved his body and that kind of thing. But so I brought my own style to it, but it really was to a large extent his words. And then when I did get to the point where I was really confident and started to innovate, I became the number one innovator in the company. And eventually, when we went from 4 facilitators to 14, those last 8 or 9 facilitators, I was the trainer of every one of those, and I was training them the
You
same way that he trained me.
you turned into the mentor. You had a great mentor as an example, and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
brought that
And
to
I found myself saying the same things, like sit down, shut up, just listen, be a sponge. I'll let you know when it's time to innovate.
I love that. I mean,